Eliza had never known the warmth of a loving family. When she was just a small child, her parents had died in a terrible accident, leaving her all alone in the world. Without any relatives to care for her, she was taken to an orphanage on the edge of a quiet town. The orphanage wasn't a bad place, but it wasn't home. It was a place where children lived in the shadows of their pasts, each one carrying their own stories of loss and longing. Eliza often wondered what it would be like to have a mother's loving arms around her, or a father who would tell her bedtime stories. Growing up without parents was not the hardest part of Eliza's life, though. It was the feeling of being an outsider, always different from the others. While most of the children in the orphanage were like her, without parents or connections, Eliza always felt that her fate was more unfair than theirs. She was a girl with nothing but the clothes on her back, her orphan's name, and a heart full of dreams that she kept hidden deep inside. As she grew older, the years in the orphanage passed, and Eliza's beauty began to bloom. She had soft, dark eyes and a gentle smile that seemed to light up even the darkest corners of the orphanage. She was kind and hardworking, always helping the other children and doing what she could to make their lives a little better. Despite her good heart, Eliza's status as an orphan made her a target for scorn. People in the town saw her as someone with no family, no money, and no future. When Eliza turned 16, she was allowed to leave the orphanage and live on her own. The world outside seemed different, but in many ways it felt even lonelier than the orphanage. She found work as a maid in the homes of the town's wealthier families. Though she worked hard, no one ever treated her as more than a servant. She was never invited to sit at the table with the family. She always ate alone, cleaning up after the others were finished. She did her job with pride and never complained, but inside, her heart ached for the simple comfort of being accepted. As Eliza grew older, she began to notice the way people in the town looked at her. The young men who once smiled politely at her now avoided eye contact. She had heard whispers, some kind, some cruel, about how she would never find a husband because of her poor background. The other women in town treated her with the same coldness, whispering behind her back about her unfortunate situation. It hurt Eliza deeply, but she had learned to hide her pain behind a gentle smile. Over time, it became clear to Eliza that no one would ever see her as a potential bride. Her status as an orphan, combined with her poverty, made her invisible to the men who were looking for wives. They sought women who had land, who came from good families, and who had prospects. Eliza had none of those things. One afternoon, a young man named Thomas, the son of the richest family in town, asked her to dance at a town festival. Eliza couldn't believe her ears. She was nervous, excited, and filled with hope. For the first time, someone seemed to see her as something more than an orphan. But after the dance, Thomas quickly stopped visiting her. He explained to his friends that he couldn't marry her because of her background. "It's just not the right match," he had said. His words felt like a knife to Eliza's heart. She couldn't understand why being an orphan made her less worthy of love. It was not her fault that she had lost her parents. But to others, it didn't matter. Eliza spent many lonely nights staring at the stars, wondering if she would ever find someone who would accept her for who she was. She dreamed of a life filled with love, laughter, and warmth, but each day she woke up to the cold reality of her situation. She had no family, no wealth, and no future to look forward to. Her heart was heavy with the sadness of being overlooked, of being rejected again and again by those who didn't understand her. There were other suitors, two wealthy men who came from influential families, but they never looked her way, not really. They would smile at her from across the room, but they never took the time to get to know her. They saw only the orphan, the poor girl who had nothing to offer except her work. Their dismissive glances hurt Eliza deeply, but she learned to swallow her disappointment just as she had learned to swallow her tears. As the years passed, Eliza's hope began to fade. She had grown accustomed to being alone, though it didn't make it any easier. The town seemed full of couples, young and old, and Eliza couldn't help but feel like an outsider. Every day she tried her best to stay strong, to keep going. But some days were harder than others. It wasn't just the lack of a husband that made her feel empty. It was the loneliness that settled deep in her heart, the quiet ache of being forgotten. Eliza kept to herself, focusing on her work and avoiding the whispers of others. She spent her days cleaning houses, running errands, and doing whatever she could to make ends meet. But her nights were spent in silence, the sound of her own thoughts echoing in her ears. She dreamed of a different life, a life where she wasn't judged by her past, a life where she could be loved for who she was. It was during one of these lonely nights that she met Jacob. Jacob was different from the other men in town. He wasn't wealthy or well-known, and his family wasn't one of the town's most respected. In fact, he had a reputation for being a bit of an outsider himself. Jacob was a rancher, living on a small piece of land just outside of town. His farm was modest and his house was simple. But Jacob had something that others didn't: kindness. He was known for being generous to those in need, always willing to help, whether it was with a neighbor's crops or a stranger's broken cart. He didn't care about status or wealth. He cared about people. Eliza first met Jacob when she was walking home from the market one afternoon. Her cart, which she had borrowed to carry some goods, broke a wheel. She was stranded in the middle of the road, and she knew it would take hours for anyone to come by. But just as she was about to give up, a figure appeared on horseback. It was Jacob, riding in from the fields. He stopped and offered to help her. "I can fix that for you," he said with a smile, his voice warm and comforting. Eliza was taken aback. She had never expected anyone to be so kind, especially someone like Jacob who had no reason to stop and help her. With his strong hands, Jacob quickly repaired the wheel, and soon they were on their way. He didn't rush her or treat her as though she were beneath him. He simply talked to her, asking about her day and telling her about his work on the ranch. For the first time in a long while, Eliza felt like someone truly cared. Jacob didn't see her as the orphan girl. He saw her as just a person, and that was more than anyone else had ever done. This small act of kindness left a deep impression on Eliza. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe there was someone in the world who could see her for who she really was, someone who didn't care about her past or her social status. Little did she know, Jacob was starting to feel the same way. His heart, too, was opening up to her in ways he hadn't expected. In the weeks following their first meeting, Eliza and Jacob found themselves crossing paths more often. Jacob had a way of being where she needed him most, whether it was helping her fix a broken cart or offering her a ride when she was caught in the rain. Every time they met, Eliza's heart would flutter. There was something about Jacob, something warm and comforting that made her feel as though she was finally being seen for who she was, not just an orphan or someone to be pitied. For Jacob, too, Eliza's presence became a light in his otherwise quiet, solitary life. He was used to working alone on his ranch, spending most of his time tending to the land and the animals. But as he grew closer to Eliza, he found himself looking forward to their conversations, even the simplest ones. She had a gentle way of speaking that made him feel at ease, and her laughter was a sound he found himself wanting to hear more often. She had a beauty that went far beyond her appearance. Her heart and kindness shone through in everything she did. Despite the growing affection between them, both Eliza and Jacob hesitated. Eliza, having been rejected so many times by the wealthier men in town, couldn't quite believe that someone like Jacob, with his modest ranch and simple life, would want her. She was still haunted by the idea that her past would be a burden to him. After all, she had nothing to offer but herself, and she feared that Jacob, like the others, might one day find that not enough. Jacob, on the other hand, wasn't concerned with Eliza's background. He had never been one to care about wealth or status. What drew him to her was her spirit, the way she smiled even when life wasn't kind, the way she helped others without expecting anything in return. But Jacob knew that, despite his growing affection for Eliza, he wasn't the kind of man anyone would expect her to marry. He didn't have much. His ranch wasn't large, and he didn't come from a wealthy family. What if Eliza wanted something more? What if one day she realized she deserved better than him? One chilly evening, as autumn leaves danced in the wind, Jacob made his decision. He couldn't wait any longer, and he couldn't let his doubts hold him back. He had to ask Eliza to be his, not because of his land or his little house, but because he loved her, and he wanted to spend his life with her. The day he planned to propose, Jacob's heart raced with a mix of excitement and nervousness. He had no fancy gifts to offer Eliza, no grand speeches to make. All he had was his heart, and that's what he was going to give her. He asked her to meet him at a small clearing by the river, where the trees created a beautiful canopy of golden and red leaves. It was a place they had often passed through together, but this time, it would hold a much deeper meaning. As Eliza arrived, her breath caught at the sight of Jacob standing there, his hands nervously tugging at his shirt. His face was serious, but there was a softness in his eyes that made her feel both nervous and comforted at the same time. He stepped forward, taking her hands in his. "Eliza," he began, his voice quieter than usual. "I've been thinking about this for a long time now. I know I don't have much to offer, but there's one thing I can give you that I know is real." He paused, his gaze never leaving hers. "I love you. I love you more than I thought I could love anyone, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me? Will you be my partner in this life, even if it's a simple one?" Eliza stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never expected Jacob to say those words. She had always dreamed of finding someone who would love her, but in her heart she feared that no one ever would. Now standing before Jacob, the man who had shown her kindness when no one else would, she could hardly believe what she was hearing. Was it possible that someone like Jacob, with his humble ways, truly wanted to be with her? She looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of doubt, but all she saw was sincerity. In that moment, Eliza knew that her fears had been unfounded. Jacob didn't care about her past or her lack of wealth. He cared about her heart, her spirit, and the love they had come to share. "Yes," Eliza whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you, Jacob. I've never been more sure of anything in my life." A smile spread across Jacob's face, and he pulled her into a warm embrace, the world around them fading away. For the first time in a long while, Eliza felt truly loved, and for Jacob, this moment was the beginning of everything he had ever wanted. They stood there together, knowing that the road ahead would not be easy, but it would be theirs to walk together. In the days that followed, word spread quickly through the town about Jacob and Eliza's engagement. Some people were shocked. Jacob, after all, was just a poor rancher, and Eliza was an orphan with no family to speak of. Many wondered what could have possibly drawn Eliza to Jacob, but those who truly knew them could see what others couldn't. They saw the way they looked at each other, the way they spoke with kindness, and the way they cared for one another. It wasn't wealth or status that bound them together. It was love. Eliza's life began to change in ways she hadn't imagined. She no longer had to worry about being alone, about being overlooked, or about the whispers behind her back. Jacob's proposal had given her something far more valuable than riches. It had given her a place in the world, a place where she was loved and wanted. The wedding was simple, just like Jacob's proposal. They didn't need an extravagant ceremony. What mattered was that they were making a commitment to each other, and that was enough. The town gathered to witness the union of two people who had found each other against all odds. There were no grand gestures, no expensive gifts, but there was love. Pure, simple love that shone brighter than anything money could buy. As they exchanged vows, Eliza's eyes filled with tears of happiness. Jacob took her hand in his, and in that moment she knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and that was all they needed. In the years that followed, Eliza and Jacob built a life together. They worked side by side on the ranch, and though their lives were simple, they were filled with love and laughter. Eliza no longer felt the sting of rejection. She had found her place not in the world's eyes, but in Jacob's, and that, she realized, was more than enough. As for Jacob, he had found the greatest treasure he could ever imagine. In Eliza, he found not just a wife, but a partner, a best friend, and someone who loved him for who he was, not for what he had. Together, they created a home, a place where love was the foundation and nothing else mattered. Their love story wasn't one of grand riches or titles, but it was real, and it was enough. In the end, Eliza and Jacob had everything they ever needed: each other.